Chapter 1: The Visit. I was definitely impressed by the house, a huge mansion at the most prestigious part of the inner suburbs. I guess it had to be an impressive house, as it was the official residence of the Belgian ambassador. The guard on duty by the gate checked my name on a list and let me proceed with the car to the ample parking area. I was slightly nervous when I approached the front door and rang the bell. I heard the melodic chimes in a distance as I waited. The door was answered by a uniformed Asian maid. "Good morning," I said rather eagerly. "My name is Nicholas Brower and I have an appointment with Madame Wittemans." I simply couldn't take my eyes from her neat uniform. Blue polycotton summer dress buttoned in front, white piping around the collar, the short sleeves in the two front pockets, a bib white apron with shoulder straps crossed in the back and buttoned by the apron strings, a small plain white cap, light brown pantyhose and white comfortable shoes with 2-inch heels. "Good morning, sir," she answered back. "Please come in." Madame Wittemans conveys her sincere apologies. She had to go out unexpectedly, but she will be back shortly. As I followed her inside the house, I couldn't stop looking at her, this time at her apron's impeccable and symmetrical bow. She took me to a small space, like a doctor's waiting room, and asked me to take a seat. She added in her heavily accented English, "Could I offer you something to drink, sir? Probably a cup of coffee, or some orange juice?" My mind was racing fast. I didn't really want to wait alone in that little room. I had to talk to her. I said in a pleasant tone of voice, "If you don't mind, I would like to have a quick look around the house. Probably Madame mentioned to you that I am a building contractor and she wants to consult with me about some renovations she has in mind." She answered quickly with an assertiveness unusual for a servant, "I think, sir, it would be better to wait for Madame's return for the full tour of the house. She is quite particular about her private spaces upstairs. But by all means you can come to the kitchen with me and have your coffee there. You can probably have a better look in that part of the house." That suited me fine. I would have the chance to talk to her. I answered quickly, "Of course, I'd love to do that." Soon I was sitting comfortably in a large kitchen table sipping my coffee as the maid continued with her chores. It didn't take me long to learn that her name was Anisita, but she was called Annie in this house. She was from Philippines and working for 2 years in the ambassador's residence. She said that the ambassador was away most of the time and her real employer was Madame. She was a fair but strict employer, and like all upper-class ladies she had her particularities. For instance, she couldn't stand the dust and any kind of messiness. Oh dear, I thought, this is not very encouraging if she has the intention to renovate the house. Both dust and messiness are a good part of any renovation works. I said in a slightly absent-minded manner, "I must admit, Annie, that this is one of my personal worries. From one side I am a building contractor and have to deal daily with dirty conditions and dust and all sorts of messiness, and on the other hand I am very particular in our own house. I want it tidy and dust-free, and I have to insist on that. My wife is the messy type and on top of that hates housework. So guess who is doing it all?" She stopped washing the vegetables. Obviously she was about to prepare lunch for her mistress, wiped her hands on a tea towel and looked at me intensely with those dark penetrating eyes. "You mean, sir, that you are the one who is doing all the housework in your own home, like me in this house?" I felt a familiar stomach flickering as she said those words. She was touching a deep and secret aspect of my life, and was saying the words I wanted to hear. I grabbed the chance and answered in an animated tone of voice, "Yes, of course, Annie. I do most of the daily housework, also the shopping and the cooking, and I must confess to you that I enjoy it very much." "There, I said it." She continued looking at me intensely, still holding the tea towel in her hands, "And may I ask you, sir, how you have that sort of time? You appear to be a busy professional man. And then, how come your wife is not more helpful around the house? I find that a bit unusual as an arrangement." I answered again in an eager manner. My stomach flickering was increased and a general excitement was building up as well. "It is very easy to explain that, Annie. You see, I work from home as a freelancer. I work alone since the people I deal with are mostly builders and technicians, and I can organize my projects very easily that way. On the other hand, my wife has a very prestigious high-powered job and is away most of the day. She goes at 9:00 in the morning and is back at 7:00 in the evening. So I am the person around the house most of the time, and it is more or less natural to deal with the housework, cooking, etc. She had a slight smile now as she made this new statement. In other words, sir, you are something like a house husband, the one who stays behind to deal with the house. I must say that I admire you a lot for that. Not many men would accept that role in their life. They are too macho for that. Her smile was broader now as she continued. It would be unheard in Philippines, such an arrangement in a couple. Men are too macho there, or this is the way their family raises them. I was getting bolder by the minute. This conversation was developing in a very interesting way. I already told you, Annie, I don't see that as something compulsory. I like what I am doing and my wife likes her career, so we managed to balance our preferences and obligations. I stopped and looked at her. Could I tell her that I usually am dressed as a maid when I work at home, or that I love wearing female clothes in general and underwear in particular? No, it is too early for that. I should be careful not to spoil the positive feeling already developed between us. I should play it cautiously. I simply said to her, no, Annie, in my case I don't have any limitations in doing what I am doing because I am a man. On the contrary, I feel quite pleased with this arrangement and my spouse. My phrase stopped abruptly as we both heard the front doorbell ringing. Annie hastily checked her apron and cap in a mirror by the kitchen window and rushed to answer the door, saying to me, Madam is back, sir. You better come with me and wait in the small sitting room. I followed her without a comment. I could sense that Madam's arrival was important. She became the formal servant again. I then realized that as we were talking before, she was feeling very relaxed and easygoing with me, like dealing with an equal. I liked that. I was going to ask her at first chance to stop calling me sir all the time. I would ask her to call me Nicholas. But first things first, I resumed my formal professional manner as well. I wanted this job and I had to convince Madam that I was able to do it properly and economically. Chapter 2: The interview. 2 weeks later, I had the contract signed and my technicians started working in the house. From the very first day, I realized that I had to deal with a very difficult and particular lady. Madame Whittemans was a no-win case. You could never please her. She hated mess and dust in particular. But how on earth could you do renovation works in a house without dust? I was very apologetic to Annie because she had to do practically all the work. By that stage she was calling me by my first name, initially Nicholas, but gradually that became Nikki. She said it was simpler for her. Also, in a couple of occasions I stayed alone in the house with her and I had the chance to talk to her more. At one point I offered to help her with the dishes. It was one afternoon, about 4:00 p.m., and all my technicians have gone and Madame was out shopping. No one was expected back until well after 6, and I simply said to Annie, if you lend me an apron I can do the dishes and you can sit and relax for a change. I feel so guilty to see you working that hard, trying to cope with all the mess my technicians create. She looked at me in an amused but kind way. Do you really mean that, Nikki? You don't have to apologize. You have to do a job here as well, and, to tell you the truth, my employers should have left the house for a few weeks. I am sure the embassy could afford to pay an excellent hotel suite for them. But no, Madame refused to go. She wants to be here to check on everything. You must have realized by now, she is a very controlling lady. I looked back at her with a sincere and eager look. Please, Annie, let me help you a bit. You know how I like doing things around the house. Now it's your chance. She started undoing her full white apron and in seconds she handed it to me. There you are, Nikki. Put this apron on. If you want to be Annie, I am happy to oblige. Though you are considerably bigger than me, I think the apron will fit you. You can adjust the bib straps before you button them to the apron strings. I took the apron from her hands and put it on very quickly and expertly. She noticed it and said, I can tell, Nikki, how experienced you are the way you put the apron on. The movements were automatic for you. I can believe you now when you say you do housework on a regular basis. I happily started doing the dishes in the sink. then cleaning the countertops, and drying the various pots and pans. Annie never bothered to get up. She was sitting comfortably in one of the kitchen chairs, just guiding me around and also chatting about various housework topics. It was unusual to see her dressed in her uniform dress and cap without the apron on, and at one point I said to her, "Probably next time I'll bring my own uniform on and help you with the housework." And then the totally unexpected happened. The kitchen door opened suddenly and Madame Whittemans walked in carrying various parcels. Annie jumped from her chair looking totally surprised, her left hand in front of her half-open mouth. She knew that Madame always rang the bell for the maid to let her in. What happened this time? As for me, I was feeling a total fool and I hastily started undoing my apron strings. "Don't undo your apron, Nicholas. I demand some explanations first." She addressed me in her calm, authoritative manner, but with a hint of strong annoyance in her voice. She started calling me Nicholas from the very beginning, though she made it clear that I had to address her as Madame or Madame Whittemans. Not a hint of equal approach there. Then she turned to Annie. "What on earth is happening here, Annie? Why do you look so disheveled? Where is your apron, girl?" She turned to me again. "And you, Nicholas, what exactly you think you are doing in front of the sink having that apron on? In fact, I can see now, you are wearing Annie's apron, so can you please explain to me? As for my maid, I'll talk to her privately afterwards." She said the last sentence with a barely covered threat in her voice, something that made Annie very worried. I could tell from her face expression. "Please, madam, it is certainly not Annie's fault. I was only trying to help her a bit with her work, feeling guilty that she had to do all that cleaning and dusting because of our renovation works in the house." She had a rather disbelieving look in her face as she spoke back to me. "This is what you usually do, Nicholas, when you take up projects in various houses? You fraternize with the maid and start doing her work? I frankly find that quite odd." Annie hesitantly tried to say something. "May I please explain a few things, madam?" "Yes, Annie, you have my permission to speak. Explain yourself, girl." "Nicky here, madam, explained to me from the very beginning that he enjoys doing housework, that he does most of the housework in his own home, and he really insisted before to help me. In fact, he was quite persistent in his request to be allowed to wear one of my aprons to do the dishes, so I gave in. I am very sorry, madam. I should have known better and refused his request." Madam looked at Annie first, then at me with a sardonic smile in her face. "So this is what you are called by my maid, Nicky. That sounds more appropriate for a maid's assistant than the rather pompous Nicholas." She stopped for a moment and her smile became broader. "Now tell me, Nicky, is it true that you like doing maid's work? Are you by any chance one of those crossdressers who love to play roles? We have quite a few of those back in Belgium." "Are you Nicky?" I was totally stunned and dumbfounded by her direct hit. My God, she could read through me. The familiar flicker in my stomach came back very strongly. I stood there looking at her, blushing all over, and instinctively I crossed my hands in front of my apron ready to give her a curtsy. "Don't waste my time, Nicky. Speak up, please. Answer my question." Madam's voice brought me back to reality. "Yes, Madame Whittemans, you are right. I do like to work as a maid, and yes, again, I occasionally like to wear female clothes, but I am not gay, ma'am." I said that with a strong emphasis in my voice. "Nobody said anything about being gay, Nicky. I know enough about crossdressers and transvestites. The majority of them are happily married people. Incidentally, Nicky, I don't think I ever asked you, are you married, and if you are, how much your wife knows?" "Yes, ma'am, I am married and..." She stopped me mid-sentence. "Please, don't call me ma'am, it sounds too American to me. Call me, like Annie here, madam." "Of course, madam. As I was saying, I am married for several years now and my wife knows and partly agrees. In fact, we decided together to..." She let me speak until I explained fully my situation. In fact, I repeated what Annie knew already, except for the fact that I was a crossdresser. That was news to Annie as well. She stayed skeptical for a couple of minutes after I finished talking. Both Annie and I had a concerned look in our faces, waiting for her decision, whatever that could be. I was worried about the ongoing renovation project. What if she decided to stop it? As for Annie, I am sure she was worried about her job. You never can be certain with those upper-class people, as they can be so heartless sometimes. She abruptly turned to Annie and said, "Make some tea, Annie, and serve it in my office with some cake. Nikki will join me there for some further talking." She then turned to me, "Take that apron off, Nikki. You can return it to Annie. She knows how I am not pleased seeing a maid on duty without her apron on. And follow me upstairs, please." I was quite perplexed when I followed Madam upstairs to her sanctum. Annie already explained to me that no one ever, even the ambassador himself, could enter this room unless she was present. It was my first time in this room as well. All those days we were doing the renovation works, that room was locked. She sat behind a very elegant Louis XV bureau, obviously a genuine antique piece. She made me sit in the other side in a rather uncomfortable antique chair. I must admit I had mixed feeling as I was getting ready to face her. I was worried and excited at the same time, and it was obvious why. Madame Woodemans had triggered my secret emotions very cleverly and in a knowledgeable manner. Somehow she appeared to be very familiar with people like me. She said it so clearly. "Do you like to play roles, Nikki?" Her voice brought me back to reality. "Now, Nikki, tell me how much longer to finish the project here?" "Another full week, madam, and we are out. Only the painters have to work now." "Good. I hope to keep the timetable because, as you know, the embassy will charge you heavy penalties if you are late. And now I come to my other proposal. Do you want to come and work as a part-time maid for me? Annie could do with some help. The house is far too big for one maid who is required to cook as well. Do you think it is feasible, considering that you have a freelancing work to run and a house and a spouse to look after?" I was stunned again. She was amazing, this woman, as she was coming straight to the point. It had to do with those Northern Europeans. They are very come-to-the-point people. I was very excited. This was the first time ever that I was asked to work as a real working maid. I couldn't believe what I just heard. And yet she was looking at me very seriously, as if she asked the most natural thing in the world, waiting for an answer. As I was trying to gain some time to prepare my answer, there was a knock on the door, and Annie came in carrying a big tray with tea and cake. She was impeccably dressed again, with her white apron and cap in position. She served us, gave me a questioning look as if trying to understand what was happening, and left after she was dismissed with the usual "that will be all, Annie," and a quick curtsy. We both had a sip, and then I spoke very carefully. "I am honored and excited, madam, that you made that proposal to me. You detected very well my inclination to work as maid. In fact, it is like a dream coming true. May I ask you, though, how many hours I would be needed and under what condition? And also, madam, would I be expected to be wearing a uniform and—" It took us nearly an hour to sort things out. Finally, this is what came out as an initial agreement. I should work minimum 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, preferably between December 2000 noon and 4:00 p.m. The hours would be a bit flexible on my part. I could come as early as 11:00 a.m. and leave as late as 5:00 p.m. depending on my other activities and the house requirements. I would be paid minimum hourly wages as a domestic. The embassy already approved the money for the employment of a part-time domestic in the ambassador's residence. I should be in uniform, identical of course to the one that Annie wears, and for that reason madam would organize with Annie early next week to take me downtown to the professional uniform shop to be fitted accordingly. Of course, the cost of uniforms and accessories would also be covered by embassy funds. At one point she looked at me carefully with a critical eye and said, "Can I see your hands, please?" I put my hands on top of her bureau. She looked at them, even touched them. "Just what I thought. You have small hands with thin fingers, very unusual for a man. That proves my theory that you will look quite passable as a woman. Men with small feminine hands usually make very convincing women." Again she was saying something quite unexpected. She must have met quite a few TVs in the past, I thought once more. "But," she continued, "I would like to see you fully dressed as a woman before I finally commit myself to employ you as a maid. I want to be absolutely sure that you can pass. After all, This is the official ambassador's residence and whoever works here should be beyond reproach. So could you bring early next week, say Monday or Tuesday, your street clothes and get dressed for me, of course in the afternoon after the workers go? Would that suit you, Nikki? Before I had the chance to answer, she continued, mind you, I don't want to see a tart, I want to see a humble working woman, someone who is befitting for a maid's position. You know the style, simple outer clothes, but simple underwear as well, not fancy sexy things. I must emphasize to you here that I don't want a fantasy maid, I want a normal hardworking maid that will be a good assistant to Annie. Do you follow me so far, Nikki? Yes, madam, I understand very well what you are saying. I can assure you that I have been dressing as a female for over 20 years now, and it is like a second nature to me. My beard is very light and I shave only about once a week. I must confess to you, ma'am, madam, that some years back I removed partly my beard, and ever since I tend to forget about it. Also, I have very little body hair and... She stopped me with her hand. That's all right, Nikki. I don't have to know all your body details. I simply want to see how you look dressed as a female. In fact, I would like you to go dressed with Annie to buy your new uniforms. This way will be more realistic, don't you think? Again, she has done it. She made me anxious and excited again. Go to buy working clothes dressed as my female persona? What a development! She finally said to me, I would like to ask you one more question before you go. Do you have a girl's name other than Nikki that you use when dressed? I answered very quickly, nearly automatically, yes, madam, when dressed I am called Jenny. Very well then, if you get the job you will be Maid Jenny for me. I think you can go now. I have to talk to my maid Annie and explain things to her. She got up from her chair, indicating that the interview was over. I got up and said to her as I was leaving, thank you, madam, I am grateful to you for your proposition. I hope I won't let you down. Don't thank me, girl. Oops, I mean Nikki. I want another maid, and somehow I know that you are the right person for the job, and I'll tell you something else too. I think crossdressers make excellent and obedient maids. Trust me, I talk from experience. She said that and she smiled at me. Finally she admitted it. She must have employed a male maid before. That explained it all. I left feeling very light-hearted and happy. A new chapter of my life was about to open. Chapter 3. The first appearance the next week was a frantic one. I had to clear the decks as quickly and efficiently as possible. First, I had to finish the renovation project. I had to have those technicians out by Friday. So I did the obvious. I promised them an extra bonus if they were completely finished by Friday lunchtime. Then there was a very good development with my wife. It was planned months before, but the timing couldn't have been better. My wife was going on a 2-week business trip starting that coming Friday, the same day I would be finishing the project. I had no other major professional engagements for those 2 coming weeks, and I wasn't planning to create any. This would be the ideal time for me to be more involved with my new project being Maid Jenny in the ambassadorial residence. When I saw Annie on Monday morning, I was a bit preoccupied. I didn't know what Madam told her, and so I approached her cautiously. She was quite cheerful and said to me in the kitchen when I went to take some coffee, "So it seems that we are going to be colleagues soon, dear Nikki." Madam explained everything to me. Fancy that, you want to be employed as a domestic here and your name is Jenny. Though I sort of expected that to happen, I couldn't stop blushing. So she told you that I'll be helping you around the house from next week on? She didn't say me only that, dear Jenny. She said that name quite loudly and embarrassed me, because my technicians were wandering around the house. She said that you are going to be employed properly as maid number 2 in this house. I can assure you, and you have noticed it yourself, I can do with some extra help. She stopped and looked at me, but I have my reservations. I don't want to work with a freak dressed up as a maid. I want to work with someone who really looks the part. Do you think you will be able to do that, Jenny? She kept calling me Jenny, as if to embarrass me. I answered back, lowering my voice, "Don't worry, Annie. I can look the part. I have been doing that for over 20 years now. The only thing I have to be careful is my voice in public, but I can manage by speaking in low tones. You will see when we are going out shopping." She looked at me questioningly again. Yes, Madam mentioned that. I supposed to take you out to the uniform shop to fit you with working clothes. I hope it works, dear Jenny, because if you manage to embarrass me in public I'll be very, very crossed with you. She looked at me sternly when she said that. I felt a bit worried. Now after Madam, the Filipino maid was trying to boss me as well? I answered as calmly as I could. Don't worry, dear Annie, Maid Jenny will be very good and she will not embarrass you, trust me. I said it very convincingly because she looked at me in a calmer way. Okay, Nikki, I'm sorry I was a bit abrupt with you, but Madam took me by surprise. I never worked with a male maid before, but she mentioned to me that they can be excellent maids, and as she said, the reason is simple. You do that by choice and not out of necessity like a poor Filipino girl like me, so you better be good. I smiled at her warmly and said, May I serve myself some coffee now, Annie? At that moment Madam came in and said half-jokingly, There you are, you two chatting again. I hope that won't happen when Maid Jenny starts working here next week. I expect my maids to be hardworking and efficient, and not chatterboxes. Is that clear for you too? I couldn't believe it. I was already treated as a maid. She didn't give me a chance to recover because she said, addressing me directly this time, I expect you to bring appropriate clothes tomorrow when you come in, Nikki, then I'll tell you when and where to change and see how Jenny looks. Is that okay with you? Yes, Madam, I already packed my clothes that I will wear tomorrow. Thank you for telling me. She left as quickly as she came and saying to Annie, Annie, coffee to my bureau, please. All Tuesday morning I was on pins and needles. I was doing my normal work, checking on my technicians, but my mind was elsewhere. I brought a bag in with all my female clothes that Annie took in her room by the kitchen. One of my questions was where I was going to change. In Annie's room, elsewhere? Madame Wittemans was out all morning. She left immediately after breakfast with her husband in the embassy car, and she wasn't expected back until after lunch. Annie said to me they had to go to an official midday function. At about 3 o'clock my technicians had gone and my anxiety was at its peak. There was still no sight of Madam. Fortunately, Annie was kind enough to offer me a sandwich. I was simply starving. We both were sitting in the kitchen table having a cup of tea when the phone rang and Annie picked it up. She was trained to answer the phone in a formal way. Good afternoon, this is the Belgian ambassador's residence. Maid Annie speaking. How can I help you, please? She continued in a respectful tone, Oh, hello, madam. Yes, the technicians had gone. Yes, he is right here. Yes, one moment, please. She turned and passed me the receiver, whispering, It's Madam, and wants to speak to you. I picked the receiver and said a timid, Hello, madam. I heard her voice quite booming and clear at the other end of the line. Hello, Jenny. Are you still willing to carry on this experiment we started? Are you prepared to go through the test? My heart was pounding strongly as I answered, Yes, madam, of course. I have all the appropriate clothes here with me as you asked. Please tell me what to do. Very well then, I heard her voice more determined now. You just go to Annie's room and have a complete makeover to your best ability. But remember what I already told you. Wear something simple and appropriate for your future position as a domestic. And please, not too much makeup. Natural color lipstick and clear nail polish. Is that clear so far, Jenny? Yes, madam, it is perfectly clear. I answered, trying to make my voice sounding a bit more feminine and at the same time as clear as possible. She encouraged my effort by telling me emphatically, That's good, Jenny, you sound very convincing on the telephone. I'll probably ask you to answer the line when on duty. Now then, to continue with my instructions, as soon as you are dressed, go to the kitchen and ask Annie to give you an apron, one of her morning big ones, like the one you had on the other day. Put it on and just help Annie with her chores. When I'll come back, I'll ring the front door bell and you answer the door, please. I want to see how you interact in a situation like this one. So goodbye, Jenny. I'll see you in about 2 hours. She hung up abruptly in her usual manner. I turned to Annie, full of excitement, and explained to her what Madam just mentioned to me. She took me to her room and closed the door, leaving me alone to get ready. The room was small but very clean and tidy. I sat on her small bed and opened my carry bag. My transformation was about to begin. It was well after 4 p.m. when I thought I was ready. I had a last look in the mirror and headed for the kitchen, feeling a bit shy, I must admit. After all, Annie was going to see Jenny for the first time. I called it Annie as I started walking. "Annie, I am ready, I'm coming over to see you now." I was wearing a very simple outfit, plain white underwear, a black A-line skirt with a hem about a couple of inches below the knee. I've noticed Annie's uniform dresses had a very conservative length, well below the knee, a plain white blouse with 3/4 length sleeves and ordinary day black shoes with 2 inches heel. My pantyhose were sheer black also. In fact, I thought this was the closest to a waitress uniform, as you see them around those days in bars and restaurants. Though I had a wig with me, I decided not to put it on. Instead, I tried to fix my own longish hair. Nothing fancy, just a more feminine coiffure, thinking that the real hair is giving me a higher credibility for the job I was applying for. The wig has always a false and theatrical look. But the most unusual piece I was wearing, but the one absolutely necessary for my femininely correct appearance, was my special girdle. This one I found in a specialized shop some years back, and it was essential to enhance my waistline, hips and derriere. It was a bit uncomfortable to wear, especially when bending. It was quite hard, for instance, to bend and put my toes through the pantyhose. But with my 36C breast forms and special girdle, I was feeling very confident in my feminine contours. I entered the kitchen the moment Annie was turning from the kitchen sink to face me. She looked at me for a whole minute as I was standing there nervously. Finally she spoke. "My God, Jenny, you do look nice. I never expected such a change. Look at these nice legs and your slim waist. And is this your real hair, Jenny? I can't believe it." I let a sigh of relief out. "Oh, thank you, Annie. You can't believe how happy you make me. Do you think Madam will approve of my appearance?" She looked at me again and said without hesitation, "She will certainly approve of your appearance, in particular because you already look that you have a sort of uniform on. It is like a waitress uniform, isn't it, Jenny? Let me give you a fancier apron to put on and a small white headpiece. Then you will look more the part." She rushed to her room and came back carrying a small apron and cap. She said to me, "Let me tie the apron on you, Jenny. You have to be certain that the bow is correct and symmetrical. Madam is very particular about that." She proceeded tying the half apron on me. It was a rounded serving apron with a pretty ruffle all around. I felt her hands fixing the bow. She asked me to place my hands on the bow. She moved my fingers into the loops, telling me, "Feel the length of the loops and make them even, then move to the knot and straighten out the creases and wrinkles." I did as I was told. She inspected the bow and said, "This is correct now. Soon it will become a second nature for you, Jenny. Now the headpiece." She adjusted it with 2 pins and sent me to the big mirror by the main entrance. She followed behind with a big smile. "Come, Jenny, let's have a look at you." I was already looking the part. I was dressed more or less as an afternoon maid. The only difference was the 2-piece outfit, black skirt, white blouse, instead of the traditional black dress. I was thrilled beyond description. Things were moving so fast. I barely had time to relax a bit with a cup of coffee or tea, and the front doorbell rung. Oh dear, this must be Madam, and I supposed to go and open the door. I felt very embarrassed again. Am I doing the right thing here? I said loudly to myself, but Annie's voice brought me back to reality. Go and get the door, Jenny. Madam is back and you supposed to let her in. Hurry up, girl. Chapter 4, Conditions of Employment. I opened the door hesitantly, feeling uncertain and perplexed. Madam looked at me critically from top to bottom as I tried a clumsy curtsy, saying, "Good afternoon, Madam." She looked at me again and said rather bluntly, "You look quite nice and convincing, Jenny, but I certainly have some remarks. Please make some fresh coffee and serve it upstairs to my bureau in 10 minutes. Then I'll talk to you." She moved quickly towards the stairs as I was saying, "Yes, right away, Madam," while trying to curtsy again. I rushed to the kitchen and started the coffee. Annie was in the adjoining utility room doing some ironing. I briefly told her that Madam asked for some coffee to be served upstairs in her bureau. She said to me in a non-committal tone of voice, not even lifting her eyes from the ironing board, "You realize of course that she asked you to take some coffee just for her and serve it. This time you are not a guest to share the coffee with her like the other day, this time you are the maid." I detected a hint of irony in her voice when she said that, but I decided not to say anything back. I needed Annie as an ally in this house. 10 minutes later I knocked at the bureau's door, holding a tray with all the necessary coffee accoutrements. It took her a bit of time to answer, and I was getting ready to knock again when I heard her voice, "Come in, Jenny." I entered hesitantly and approached her desk, asking at the same time, "Where shall I serve the coffee, madam?" She pointed at one corner of her desk, telling me, "Put the tray down, Jenny, and serve me a cup, just coffee and cream, no sugar please." I did as I was told and offered her the cup. She took it, had a sip, and said to me, "Leave the tray for the moment and go and stand in the middle of the room. Fold your hands in front of your apron and listen carefully. Don't interrupt me unless I ask you a specific question. Is that clear, Jenny?" I felt like a 10-year-old, about to be punished by the teacher, but also I felt a mounting excitement. This lady knew exactly what she was doing. Once more I thought that she must have done the same thing several times in the past. She was completely in control. I managed to murmur a "Yes, madam," and took my position. She drank some more coffee and started her small speech. "I'll start from the positives. You look quite nice and convincing, I already mentioned that to you. I like the fact that you use your own hair, much more correct for a person in your position. Also your makeup is quite discreet, though I would like a less obvious lipstick, a more neutral color. Your waistline and hips are quite womanly, I am sure you wear the right device for that. And finally you can walk gracefully, though I would suggest smaller steps and try feeling your thighs rubbing each other when walking." She stopped, had a sip of her coffee, and continued, "Now we come to the negatives." She looked at me questioningly. "Do you know what I am talking about, Jenny?" I looked at her puzzled. I couldn't think of anything negative. I said quite frankly, "I am sorry, madam, I can't think of anything, I simply followed your instructions." "This is precisely the point, Jenny, you didn't follow my instructions to the letter. I told you to wear a full white apron, you know the kind you were wearing the other day, with a bib and straps that crisscross in the back. Instead you wear a half-serving apron. Also, I never asked you to wear a cap. I know how eager you are to look the part, but something that you must never forget is that as a domestic you have to follow your employer's instructions to the letter, no questions asked." She said the last sentence quite emphatically. I wanted to answer to her, but I didn't dare. She didn't ask me to speak. I felt quite uneasy and I started playing with the edge of my apron as she continued looking at me critically. Finally she said, "Speak up, girl, you have my permission." "I am sorry, madam, I completely missed that detail with the full apron," and Annie suggested the small apron and cap to emphasize my waitress appearance. "I must admit that everything is quite new to me, but I am willing to learn." She gave me a softer look this time. "You will learn quite soon, Jenny, that instructions like the one I gave you over the phone are not a detail how you called it, they are in fact specific orders that you have to follow to the letter. This has to become a second nature to you, like the apron you have to wear at all times when on duty." She continued after another sip of her coffee, "I come back to my initial proposition, Jenny. Do you want to work in this house as a part-time maid, or more correctly as a junior maid to assist my principal maid Annie? We already discussed the conditions and the wages. In fact, my direct question to you is as follows: can you organize the rest of your life in a way to be able to work here 5 days a week, 4 hours a day?" She looked at me very intensely, but it was a question I was expecting, so I answered as truthfully as I could, "Yes, madam, under my present conditions I am certain I can manage it." I should add also that for the next 2 weeks, starting this coming Friday, I'll be free from my usual activities. My wife, or should I say more correctly my other employer, is away on a business trip for 2 weeks and I haven't planned a new project, so I'll be able to work more hours in your house, if of course you approve of it, madam. I finished my sentence with a slight bob, trying to be respectful to my new employer. She obviously liked the idea, because she smiled quite happily and said instantly, "This is great news, Jenny. That way you will be able to adapt more quickly to your new status. In fact, I have a new proposition for you. Starting Saturday you can move in for 2 weeks as my new live-in junior maid. This way for 2 weeks you will be nothing else but a maid. You will dress, act, behave and work in only this capacity. This will be your trial period, and if everything goes well you will continue working as an outside maid afterwards, as I originally mentioned to you. How about that, girl?" Oh God, I couldn't believe it. Madam just mentioned something way above my wildest dreams. It couldn't be true. I started shaking slightly out of excitement, but I managed to answer in a fairly steady voice, "I'd love that, madam. I would be very honored to be employed here as a live-in domestic for the next 2 weeks." "So be it then. Finish by Friday your project here as agreed. Try and finish all your other outside obligations by that day, including saying goodbye to your other employer, as you call your wife, I trust for a good reason, and I'll expect you to appear properly and modestly dressed as Jenny on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. From then on everybody will know that you are Jenny, the new junior maid. The guards by the gate will be notified, and of course the ambassador. In fact, I'll introduce you to him later on Saturday, after you come back from your shopping trip with Annie. We have to get you the right clothes for your new job. Is that satisfactory for you, Jenny?" I hastily answered in a voice full of gratitude, or so I thought. "Yes, madam, I am very grateful to you for this opportunity you offer me, and—" She stopped me in a slightly annoyed manner. "Don't thank me, girl. I'll repeat to you once more in case you forgot, that I expect you to be a real maid here doing real and strenuous work, and the only reason I picked you for this position is that I know by experience that a crossdresser like you is a far better domestic than any female who is doing this job for a living." She briefly paused but continued before I had the chance to say anything, "You can go now and change. I will not see much of you the next few days. I will be quite busy outside the house, but Saturday morning I expect to see Jenny here at 9:00 o'clock sharp." That will be all for now.